If I had known what was coming my way, maybe I would never have allowed myself to trust him so deeply. These words kept running through my mind as I looked back on the months when I had entered a relationship with him so carefree. In hindsight, I often wondered how I hadn't noticed the small signs earlier. I had ignored all the red flags because I wanted him so badly. I wanted to believe he was the right one. But on that day, when I caught my boyfriend sharing a kiss with my best friend, I realized just how wrong I was. It all started so simply. A few shared evenings, talks about our favorite movies, music, and the future. It felt as if we had known each other forever. We had so much in common, and I could rely on him. In the first months of our relationship, everything was perfect. We went on trips, went to the movies, and laughed a lot together. The thought that he might want something else or be interested in another woman seemed so distant back then. He always had an ear for me, and I enjoyed spending time with him. We visited favorite restaurants, walked hand in hand through the city, and talked about everything imaginable. I felt so secure in his presence. It was as if he was the person I wanted to spend the rest of my life with. But over time, I noticed small changes that irritated me. At first, it was just a little thing. He acted a bit strange when I used his phone to look something up. A little suspicious, but not immediately alarming. Maybe it was just my impression, I thought at the time. But these small incidents began to pile up. Once, he asked me why I had looked at his messages on his phone when he wasn't around. I explained that I was just looking for something that would interest both of us, but the feeling that he had something to hide lingered. He also started guarding his things more. He'd never had a problem with me using his stuff or going through his pockets, but suddenly he became more cautious. I noticed it when, during a particularly quiet moment, he asked me why I had left his phone on the table. Of course, I didn't react dramatically, but the feeling that I didn't know everything was slowly growing inside me. I was never the type of person who constantly sought answers in a relationship. Trust was important to me, and I wanted to give him the space he needed. But the more he kept his things locked away, the more my insecurity grew. Was it just my distrust, or was there more to it? I didn't want to admit it, but a quiet sense of unease began to settle inside me. It was an uncomfortable feeling that followed me like a shadow, though I couldn't really name it. But I decided not to jump to conclusions. Maybe I was overreacting, I often thought. Maybe he was just being overly cautious, or there was another innocent explanation for his behavior. I didn't want to judge too quickly, so I tried to ignore it, but it became increasingly difficult to push the thought aside. It wasn't until he mentioned in one of our conversations that he would feel better locking his things in a certain cabinet that I started seriously questioning things. It felt odd, and I wondered what he was really hiding from me. Was he just particularly organized? Or did he have secrets he didn't want to share with me? I didn't know, but the questions gnawed at me like a soft, steady current slowly eroding the foundation of my trust. Then there was the matter with my friends. I had never felt like he got along particularly well with any of my friends, but I never paid much attention to it. Maybe it was just the natural course of a relationship where not everyone gets along with everyone else. But when one evening he asked me why I spent so much time with my best friend, I suddenly felt watched. Why was he suddenly so interested in how much time I spent with others? Could he not trust me? Or was he just being overly protective? All these small things piled up, and while I tried to ignore them, the feeling of uncertainty grew louder in my head. Yet, I decided not to address anything, letting the issue lie. Maybe I was imagining it all. But one particularly rainy afternoon, as I sat alone at home reflecting on the past weeks, a strong urge to search for answers grew inside me. What if I was wrong? What if I had misjudged him all this time? He was never the type to talk much about his past. At first, I thought it was just his way of keeping private things to himself, but over time, I began to wonder why he omitted certain topics. Why didn't he talk about his family, or the people he used to spend a lot of time with? Was he involved in something he didn't want to tell me about? The more I thought about it, the more the suspicion grew inside me that there was something he wasn't telling me. But I didn't want to expand on these thoughts. Instead, I pushed them away and tried to focus on the good sides of the relationship. But I couldn't shake the feeling. Something wasn't right. It was as if something was hanging in the air. A sense of uncertainty that kept making me question whether I had been blind. I wanted to believe him, but the more I thought about it, the more I questioned what I knew about him. What if the picture I had of him was really just an illusion? I didn't want to lose control of my life, but a small, nagging doubt took hold. Then came my best friend's birthday. I had really been looking forward to it, knowing it would be an opportunity to relax and take a break. She had decided to celebrate her birthday at an amusement park, a place we had all loved in the past, and I was curious to see how the day would unfold. It was supposed to be a day of fun and lightheartedness. Yet, in the back of my mind, I felt that strange sense of tension spreading through me. Something told me this day would be different, but I couldn't say why. It was a clear, sunny morning when we set off for the amusement park. The excitement was in the air, not only because it was my best friend's birthday, but also because we had all decided to experience something new together. It was supposed to be an unforgettable day, filled with laughter, roller coasters, and fresh air. Yet, at that moment, I had no idea that the day that was meant to bring me so much joy would also be the day my entire world would come crashing down. I had been looking forward to the day from the start. We had all gotten together, bought the tickets, and made plans to spend the whole day at the park, followed by a dinner in the evening. The thought of the glowing lights, the smell of cotton candy, and the cheerful screams from the roller coasters made me excited. My best friend, who was celebrating her birthday, was in high spirits, and my boyfriend seemed to be enjoying himself as well. It was a shared moment of happiness, or so I thought. We all met around 10 a.m. at the park entrance. It was still early, but the park was already filling up with people. The sun was shining, and the weather was just right, not too hot, perfect for enjoying the day. After we greeted each other with hugs, we set off to explore the rides. The park was full of colorful booths, loud noises, and music blasting from the speakers. It was the perfect place for fun and distraction. Or so I thought. The first few hours passed in a blur. We rode roller coasters, ate popcorn, and laughed at the crazy rides. My boyfriend was with us, but I noticed that he kept becoming briefly distant. It wasn't much, just little moments when he turned away or his gaze wandered. At first, I thought it was just my imagination. After all, we were together and should have been enjoying the moment. But with each passing look, each glance that drifted past me, a quiet unease began to grow inside me. And then came the moment that changed everything. We were at one of the stands, buying cotton candy, when my boyfriend suddenly said he wanted to go to another stand to get some chips. I nodded and let him go without much thought. Meanwhile, I got the cotton candy and waited while he was gone. There was nothing unusual about it, and I had no reason to distrust him. But when I held my cotton candy in my hand, I decided to visit another stand as well. It was the same one he had gone to, but when I arrived, he wasn't there. I thought he might have gotten lost in the crowd, or perhaps found something else on the other side of the park. But after a few minutes, I decided to look for him. It was at one of those photo booths where everything began. The glowing screens outside showed pictures of couples posing and laughing inside the little booth. I had seen many people having fun there, but as I walked past the 3 booths, I came across a picture that took my breath away. At first, I couldn't grasp it, and then I needed a moment to comprehend what I was seeing. My boyfriend and my best friend. They were standing in the photo booth, kissing. It was as though time had stopped. It felt surreal, like the ground had disappeared beneath me. I couldn't believe it. The shock hit me like a lightning bolt, and for a moment I was paralyzed. What was going on here? Why were they together in this moment? What did it mean? I suddenly felt like an outsider, as if the world around me had darkened. My thoughts were racing. Why? Why now? Why her? I couldn't get the images out of my head, and in that moment, I was sure something was terribly wrong. It wasn't just the kiss, but the thought that my best friend, the one I had known for years, was the one he had connected with in that moment. Had this really happened? Had he been lying to me all these months? Sweat broke out on my skin, and my hands trembled as I tried to comprehend the moment. The pain slowly set in, like a dull blow that gradually spread through my whole body. I couldn't bear it, but I knew I had to do something, that I couldn't just look away. In that moment, while they kissed in the photo booth, I pulled my phone from my pocket and began filming. I knew I had to capture it, evidence if necessary. But in that moment, I also felt somehow betrayed, as though I was the one with no control over the situation. Tears began to fall, but I held them back as I retreated to the nearest restroom. I was completely overwhelmed, unsure of what to do. The reality that I was witnessing my boyfriend, the man I had trusted, and my best friend, who I had always seen as my confidant, sharing such intimacy, was suffocating. So there I stood in the bathroom of the amusement park, tears in my eyes, my heart racing. The world around me blurred, as if it kept turning while I remained frozen in place. The scene I had just witnessed had burned itself into my memory. I couldn't see anything else but their faces, kissing as if they were alone, as if they had no secrets between them. as if they were not just my best friends, but someone who had chosen me and someone I trusted. It was hard to process all of this, especially because the pain didn't hit me immediately. It was more of a feeling of emptiness that flowed through me, one I couldn't immediately put into words. It felt as if my heart was freezing, as if everything around me was turning cold and empty. I couldn't believe what I had seen, but deep down I knew it was the truth. It was real. They had done it. They had betrayed me. I knew I couldn't just walk away from the situation, that I couldn't just look back and pretend nothing had happened. But what was I supposed to do? What could I do? I was alone in that moment, with the truth I had ignored for so long. It was a truth that now crashed over me like a landslide, pulling the ground from beneath my feet. After hiding in the bathroom for a while to collect myself, I went back to the others. It was hard to return with a smile after everything I had just experienced, but I knew I couldn't confront them yet. Not here, not now. Not in this moment, where everything felt so surreal. So, I forced myself to act normal. When my boyfriend returned with the chips, he greeted me with a smile and a comment about the long line he had to wait in. Long line, but it was worth it, he said, handing me the chips. I forced a smile and nodded, pretending nothing had happened. I didn't want to say anything in that moment, didn't want to do anything that would escalate the situation. Instead, I steered the conversation in a different direction. It was one of the hardest lies I had ever told in my life, and I could barely stand myself as I tried to act normal. We then all went to the restaurant, just as planned. It felt strange because I couldn't enjoy the evening, even though the others were. I felt like an actor in a play that wasn't mine. Everything felt empty and insignificant. The conversations around me seemed to blur as my thoughts kept returning to what I had seen. I couldn't bear my boyfriend's gaze anymore. When he spoke to me, I barely listened. In my head, the question kept repeating. How could he do this? How could she do this? I felt so naive, so stupid, for not having noticed sooner. But how could I have known? How could I have guessed that they would behave like this behind my back? By the end of the night, it was almost unbearable to keep up the facade. We had said our goodbyes, and I felt a huge weight settle on my shoulders. I just wanted to go home, just wanted to be alone to process everything that had just happened. It was almost as if I had spent the whole day in a foreign reality. I said goodnight to my friends, and then slipped quietly out of the restaurant. They didn't notice, as they were busy with their own conversations. But I felt empty, drained, and lost. When I got home, my boyfriend wasn't there yet, which brought me a strange sense of relief. It gave me a little space to think, to find myself, before he came back. But that space felt like a prison. I sat alone in my apartment, surrounded by memories of a relationship that was now shattered. I knew I would have to confront it soon, but I couldn't live in this lie anymore. I knew the truth had to come out, but I wasn't sure how to approach it yet. Finally, he came back, with an innocent look and a smile, as if nothing had happened. But I knew I couldn't stay silent any longer. The anger and pain were bubbling up inside me. It was as if something inside me was breaking. And I knew I was ready to confront things. But it wasn't going to be easy. Not yet. The hours passed, and as I sat in my apartment, I nearly broke under the weight of unresolved thoughts swirling through my mind like a storm. I knew I had to talk to him soon, but the question was, what should I say? How should I bring up the truth, when I didn't even fully know how to process it myself? When he opened the door and entered the room with a smile, I almost mistook him for a different person. The normalcy of his behavior was like a slap in the face. How could he be so calm? How could he not see that he had just shattered my heart into 1,000 little pieces? His smile seemed so fake, so painfully wrong, that it was almost unbearable to look him in the eyes any longer. "Hey, how was it?" he asked as he took off his jacket. He seemed oblivious to the fact that I might be feeling differently, that everything between us had broken in that moment. I opened my mouth, but no words came out. The silence between us was suffocating, and the room seemed to close in around me. I wanted to scream, to say everything to his face that I knew, but something held me back. Maybe it was the fear of how he would react. Maybe I just needed a little more time to gather myself. Or maybe I just didn't have the strength to ignite the drama today. But then the anger took over. It was an anger that spread from the deepest corners of my body, like a fire that couldn't be stopped. "So you just decided to sleep with my best friend while I trusted you, while I believed you were the one I wanted to grow old with?" I said finally, my voice sharp, almost like a knife. I couldn't suppress the anger any longer. "And you didn't even have the decency to tell me the truth." You had to lure me into the park and leave me there like a fool so I could catch you kissing her." He froze when he heard the words I spoke. I could see the color drain from his face, as if he suddenly lost control. But he didn't say anything. He just stood there, staring at me, as if he couldn't look me in the eyes. The silence between us was almost unbearable now. He tried to say something, but I interrupted him. "You can spare all the excuses you might be trying to come up with in your head. I saw it, I have the proof, and I know what you did. I know what you did to me," I continued. My voice was now laced with a hoarse rage that felt like it was tearing me apart from the inside. "And you know what? I'm sorry, but I've had enough. It's over." He took a step closer, as if trying to touch me, but I stepped back. I couldn't stand his presence. Not now, not anymore. He tried to speak, but I didn't want to listen. I knew that words couldn't change anything now. "You betrayed me, and that will never be undone. I can't trust you anymore, and I'll never be able to look you in the eyes again without thinking about what you did to me." He opened his mouth, but I held up my hand to stop him. I knew I couldn't listen anymore. I knew there were no words that would take away the feeling of betrayal and disappointment. Everything he said would just be another attempt to shift the blame. "I don't want to hear anything more from you," I said finally, almost in a whisper, as the tears I had held back for so long finally took control. "I'm going to record the whole truth in a video and send it to our friends and your family. I want everyone to know what you've done." I turned and went to my bedroom to get the video I had taken when I had seen them in the photo booth. It was my last step to make sure the lie wouldn't continue. It was the final goodbye to a relationship that had hurt me deeply. He stood silently in the living room for a while, but I could see the pain and anger on his face. I knew he didn't know how to behave now, but I didn't care. All that mattered to me in that moment was bringing the truth to light and taking my life back. I sent the video to everyone close to me, my family, my friends, and even his family. I wanted them to know what he had done to me. It wasn't revenge, it was an act of liberation. I couldn't live in uncertainty anymore. I needed clarity, and I needed them to know that I wasn't willing to play this game any longer. It didn't take long before I received messages from many of my friends and his family. Many apologized to me, some blocked him on all social media. It was a small comfort to know I wasn't alone, that many of them supported me and recognized how wrong he had acted. But the real moment of liberation came when I saw him standing at my door. My ex stood in front of the apartment, his things in bags on the floor. The fact that he was now without a home after what he had done to me felt like a well-deserved closure. Without another word, he turned and walked away. I knew it was over. I took a deep breath and felt a part of me healing. It wasn't easy, but it was the beginning of a new chapter. A chapter in which I took control of my life back. It was strangely quiet in my apartment. When he closed the door behind him, he left not only empty suitcases and a vanished presence, but also a strange emptiness within me. It was a silence that weighed heavier than the noise of the arguments we had in the past hours. The torn feeling was no longer there, yet I still felt exhausted, as if the events had struck me to my core. I couldn't quite say which was worse, the moment of realization that he had betrayed me, or the instant when he hadn't yet understood it, when he ignored me and apologized for his lies without truly meaning it. I sank into my sofa and stared blankly for a long time. My heart beat steadily, but my head was full of thoughts. Could I have done something differently? Should I have noticed earlier that something was wrong? These questions crept into my mind over and over, but I tried to ignore them. There was no point in getting lost in thoughts about missed signs and mistakes. It was over now. What remained was the question. What do I do now? The first step was to allow myself to grieve. I had always believed that I was someone who would recover quickly from such setbacks. But it wasn't that easy. I felt as though the ground beneath my feet had vanished. Everything I had taken for granted suddenly had no value. The relationship, the friendship, the future I had planned with him. All of it was gone, torn apart by a single decision. A decision I couldn't understand, and that drove me to despair again and again. Why? Why had he done this? It was a strange feeling to know that I had invested so much time in someone who had never truly respected me. But I also knew that I couldn't ask myself these questions anymore. It was over, and the truth was, he didn't mean anything to me anymore. What I was increasingly becoming aware of, however, was that he had never seen me the way I had seen him. The way he had betrayed me reflected not just a lack of trust, but also a lack of respect. I couldn't stay in this relationship any longer. It wasn't just a betrayal of my love, but of everything we had built. I had to find myself again. I had to free myself from the wound he had left inside me. The first decision I made was to stop letting him dictate my life. I needed time to heal, but I knew I had to do it without him. And that was the first step on the road back to myself. 2 days after the breakup, while I was slowly getting back on my feet, I decided to talk to my best friend. The woman who had always been so close to me. The woman who had also been involved in this lie. The woman with whom I had shared everything for years. I knew it would be hard. She had not only betrayed my boyfriend, but also me. It was a betrayal deeper than any other. It was a tough step I took when I called her. The words I said on the phone were simple, but they hit her like a blow. I know what happened between you and him, and I want nothing more to do with you. It's over. The silence on the other end of the line was almost as painful as the moment when I had realized it myself. I knew the conversation wouldn't go well, but I hadn't expected the number of apologies and explanations she would offer me. She explained that she felt guilty, that she was sorry, but that wasn't what I wanted to hear. It was too late for apologies. It was too late to restore trust. You've destroyed everything. Not just the relationship, but also our friendship. I never want to see you again, I said and hung up. The pain I felt in that moment was almost indescribable. But I knew I had to do it. Ending the friendship wasn't easy, but it was necessary. She had betrayed me, and I couldn't continue to live in a world shaped by such people. After hanging up, I went to the window and stared outside. I needed peace to think. I needed time to find myself again. The world outside didn't seem to understand what was going on inside me, but I didn't care. I knew I would rise again, that I would come back stronger. I had promised myself that. In the following weeks, I started getting involved in new things that didn't remind me of the past. I began traveling more, spending time with the people who truly appreciated me. I broadened my horizons, looked for new challenges, and found peace in the small things. I started laughing again, living again, and most importantly, finding myself again. I didn't want this painful experience to dominate my life. I didn't want the betrayal and pain from then to shape my future. Step by step, day by day, I found myself again. I knew it was a long road, but I also knew it would lead me to a stronger version of myself. The pain would eventually fade, and I would not only leave the relationship behind, but also the person who had hurt me. And one day, when I looked back, I wouldn't just think of the broken trust, but of the strength I had found to keep moving forward. It was amazing how quickly life started moving again, even though I didn't feel truly ready to move on. But life demanded it, and the world kept spinning, even though I wasn't sure anymore where I stood. I spent the first few days at my own pace, withdrawing, reflecting, and taking time to heal. But eventually I had to get up, open the windows, and breathe again. I thought a lot about how things would go from here. There were so many aspects I hadn't considered before. How I had lost myself in that relationship, how much I had adapted to someone who wasn't good for me. But now I could see it all more clearly. The betrayal wasn't just an act of infidelity, it was also a reflection of how I had given up my own needs and desires for the sake of a relationship. The first step was to free myself from all of it, from the past, from the memories, from the places that reminded me of him. I packed all the things into boxes that reminded me of him and the time we had spent together. I knew I couldn't keep them forever. And so, one Sunday morning, I sat down and went through all the photos, gifts, and keepsakes that had accumulated over the years. Some things I kept for now, to think about later, but much of it went straight into the trash. I no longer needed reminders of that time, not as long as I was still trying to free myself. I felt like I now had a chance to redefine myself, to find the woman I had been before this relationship. It was like looking into a mirror and seeing a completely new perspective. I realized how many facets I had suppressed over the last few years, how many dreams and wishes I hadn't pursued because I had given them up for something else. I spent more time with my family and friends who truly mattered to me, the ones who had helped me see this relationship for what it really was from the beginning. They were always honest with me, even when the truth hurt, and they were there when I needed them. I sought the company of people who not only loved me, but also encouraged me to think outside the box, to go down new paths. It wasn't easy to accept these changes. Every decision I made reminded me that I was saying goodbye to a part of my life that I had known for so long. But it was also a release. I had to regain control, not over the relationship I had lost, but over my own life. I knew I would no longer be defined by someone else, but that I was the one who would set the direction. One evening, I sat alone in a cafe I had frequented years ago when I was with him. It was one of those places that always smelled like a certain moment, like shared conversations and many smiles. But today it felt different. It wasn't the cafe he and I always visited. It was my cafe, my moment. I sat there with a book in hand, thinking about all the changes that had already happened. I thought about everything I still wanted to achieve. I had freed myself not only from him, but from everything that held me back. And then came the moment when I truly said to myself for the first time, "It's all going to be okay." I had no idea how long it would take, but I knew that I could walk this path on my own if necessary. I would no longer wait for someone to tell me how to live. I would make my own decisions. I wasn't perfect yet. I knew healing would take time. But in that moment, I felt a new strength within me. I would move forward, even though the path wasn't entirely clear yet. The new beginning wasn't just a cliché. It was the reality I had to face. I decided to treat myself to more time for the things that truly fulfilled me. I signed up for a cooking class I had always wanted to take. I wanted to travel, meet new people, and gain new perspectives. But most of all, I wanted to rediscover myself. I wanted all the dreams I had suppressed to come back to life. It wasn't easy, but I was ready. After all, I knew I could overcome any obstacle. There were still days when I thought about him. There were still moments when the pain came back, like a quiet shadow that fell over my life. But I knew now that I didn't have to give him power over my life anymore. I had taken back my own life. And with each passing day, I came a little closer to a true new beginning. Saying goodbye to the past is never easy. Even when you're sure you're taking the right step, there are still those moments of uncertainty that freeze you in place. I had thought a lot about the relationship and processed the betrayal, but the question of how to truly let go of something that had been with me for so long still lingered. The thought that I had spent a significant part of my life with someone who had deceived me was not so easily discarded. I felt as though the past still lived in the walls of my apartment. It was as if every room reminded me of him. This constant presence of memories, which spoke up with every breath I took, was what still tortured me. Even in my newfound freedom, even in my efforts to redefine myself, there was a part of me that didn't know how to let go. The betrayal had lodged itself in my thoughts, like a shadow that followed me even when I tried to look ahead. One evening, I decided to go to him. Not to meet him again, but to finally take back control. I had never really had that moment of closure. It was always just "we're done," followed by silence. But I knew I needed one last confrontation with the past to truly find peace. When I stood at his door, I felt my heart beat faster. It was the moment when I knew this was the last time I would look in his direction. It felt like I was burying a part of myself that had demanded so much of me over the years. I knocked on the door, and when he opened it, it was as though time froze for a moment. He stood there, surprised to see me, but then stepped aside to let me in. In the past few months, I had changed a lot. I had become stronger, clearer, and I knew what I needed. I knew I was here to make peace with myself. "What are you doing here?" he asked, his voice uncertain, almost as if he didn't know how to handle me. But I knew exactly what I had to say. "I'm here to tell you that it's over," I said, and although the words were heavy in my mouth, I felt them lift a burden from my shoulders. "I left you, but I never truly said goodbye. I wanted you to know that I've taken control of my life back, and I won't let you into my thoughts anymore." He stared at me for a moment, and I could see the mix of shame and anger in his eyes. It was the first time I noticed anything other than the familiar fear in his reaction. "I never wanted it to end this way," he said, his voice quiet, almost apologetic. But I knew there was no apology that could make it right. "You made this decision," I replied calmly. "Not me. You hurt me and you destroyed my friendship. And now I will go my own way." I turned and walked toward the door, but before I opened it, I turned back to him. There wasn't much more I could say to him, but it felt important to have this moment. "I hope that one day you realize what you've lost. But I'm no longer part of your story." I left him in the silence, and as I closed the door behind me, it felt as though a chapter had closed forever. It wasn't the dramatic conclusion many expect in such moments, but rather a quiet release. A final glance back to make sure I had said everything that needed to be said. In the days after that meeting, I felt strangely liberated. The farewell was final, and for the first time in a long time, I felt that I wasn't just leaving my past behind, but also opening the door to something new. I felt like a new person who had finally taken control of her life and her decisions. The pain hadn't disappeared, but it had changed. It was no longer the paralyzing pain of the last few months, but rather a constant companion that helped me grow. I knew that I wasn't at the end of my journey yet. There was still so much to process, many questions swirling in my mind. But I had begun to walk in a new direction. The new beginning I had dreamed of for so long was now a reality. And I knew I had the strength to move forward. The past would always be part of me, but it no longer had power over me.